So we start to superimpose things like our belief structure on top of the actual raw sensations that we're getting instead of just experiencing those raw sensations. Hey guys, Greg Chaplin here, physical therapist and strength conditioning specialist. In this video, I'm going to share an important insight with you that helped me tremendously to improve my movement. And I think it's going to help you as well, especially if you're that person who's been trying exercise after exercise, but can't seem to get the results you want. This might actually be the key that you're missing. And now before we get into this video, I just want to say that this is the first video I'm posting after reaching 5,000 subscribers. So if you haven't subscribed already, go ahead and do that now. And if you're one of those 5,000, thank you so much. It really means a lot to me. I'm hoping we can grow this channel and help even more people to improve their movement. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the video. Okay, so if you've been watching this channel, you probably know that stretching and strengthening tend not to work when it comes to improving movement for a number of reasons that we talked about in a lot of other videos. But just to really make this simple, overall, the way that movement occurs is we have inputs from our environment that we get via our senses, and then we take those inputs, we process them, and we create a movement output. And so it really is like an equation where we're thinking about what is the information we get in, then what do we do with it, and then that helps us to actually move. So if we have bad information coming in on the way in or unreliable information coming on the way in, then oftentimes we have trouble processing that, or we have to work harder to process that in order to then be able to get a movement output to happen. So for many of us, we try the stretching and strengthening type things because we're thinking we got a tight muscle or a weak muscle. But then at the end of the day, it doesn't really work because the real issue is how our brain and body is perceiving space and how it's acting based on those inputs. So what we want to do is we want to balance out the inputs that we're getting. So if we think about our five senses, we have taste, touch, smell, and the other ones, right? The five: taste, touch, smell, vision, hearing, right? Taste, touch, smell, vision, hearing. So those are the five. And then we can kind of think of this sixth sense as being thought-based awareness of thinking. We can put thinking in there as a sixth sense. So we have these five senses, and then we have thinking as a sixth. And what we want to think about is sort of what are we doing in terms of our awareness when we're doing movement. So when we're actually doing movement, the how we're doing it is very important. So if we're doing this and we're getting a true sense for the sensations that we're getting and we're not filtering it through any additional thought process, that is going to help us better to be able to bring these things that are at a conscious level of awareness during the practice of the exercise to a more subconscious level of awareness when we're just moving around. Because after all, we want these movements to be happening at an effortless subconscious level. So if when we're training them, we're putting too much emphasis on this thought-based filtering where all of our sensory information is being filtered through thought, then we're going to have trouble actually achieving that subconscious level of awareness. So what we want to do is we want to have a balance between all these senses, and we're going to have thought as being one of those senses. So I'm going to talk about this balanced awareness versus this thought-based awareness and just compare the two. So if you see this little graphic up on the screen, there's this pathway from our senses directly to the awareness, and that's in the green color. And then to contrast that, you see a pathway from each sense, then going to thought and filtering through thought back up to awareness. So if we're doing the latter, what we're really doing is we're kind of asking the mind for a second opinion when it comes to what we're feeling. So we start to superimpose things like our belief structure on top of the actual raw sensations that we're getting instead of just experiencing those raw sensations. So for example, if we're expecting to feel a certain thing during an exercise, we might not actually be experiencing that or actually feeling it, but then we refer back to thought and we say, what am I feeling? Or am I doing this right? And we start to create this tension in our heads that actually keeps us in this state of being in our heads and not in our bodies. So what we want to do under these circumstances is we actually want to relax thought a little bit and let thought come down just a little bit so it's balanced with the rest of the senses. And so an easy way that we can do this is we can start to manipulate some of the other senses. So if we think about the things that make us feel like we're in our heads thinking, that we're located somewhere between our ears and behind our eyes, vision is a sense that's going to be very powerfully correlated with those feelings. So if we're very identified and focused with the idea of operating from a place of using our vision, what we're usually going to find is that we're not very embodied and we have this feeling of being very much in our heads. To contrast that, if we then shift to something that's more like touch, and touch becomes more of the primary emphasis, but we're still seeing and we're still hearing, but we're not actively prioritizing those at the top of the list, oftentimes that's going to result in us feeling less in our head, but more embodied. So, to give you an idea of how this might go, what we would do first when we're thinking about being identified with thought and with vision a little bit more is first to shift out of that. So, when we're operating from this place of vision, the first shift that we want to do is go from seeing, as in looking at objects and having this kind of visual behavior that's jumping from one thing to the next, to a type of visual behavior that feels like it's more receiving. So, what we want to do is we want to start to see the space between objects, and we want to get a nice soft kind of gaze going. And what we can do is, instead of focusing on vision, we can then start to replace that with focusing on hearing. Because as we hear things in our environment, what we're going to find is that we can't actually force hearing, or we can't hold on to sounds. That's just going to come to us, and then it's going to be there for just a brief moment in time, and it's always going to change. So because hearing has this time-based element to it, it allows us to feel what it's like to receive, instead of that feeling of kind of reaching out and focusing on things and having that feeling of contraction and tension that we often get when we're very focused with our eyes. So the first thing we do is we open the peripheral, we get a very soft kind of gaze going, and then we start to allow hearing to happen, where we can hear these different sounds coming in, and we just pay close attention so that we're aware every single time when we're actually hearing something. And then we can settle in and kind of have vision still be there, but not have to be referring back to that vision as what grounds us. Now we have a little bit more ground within our head with hearing. So now we've kind of balanced those head senses, if you will. And now if we can then practice kind of leaving those there, and then start to notice any sort of thought patterns that we're having. So to think about hearing thoughts as a little bit of language in the mind, but seeing them as something separate from ourselves. So the same way that we heard sounds, we're going to think about kind of seeing or hearing our thoughts as just another appearance in our awareness. And so we don't always have to filter our other senses through the lens of thought. We don't have to think, well, what did I hear? We can just hear it. We don't have to think, what did I see? We can just see it. And then when we look at thought itself, we can see this as just a pattern of energy, a little bit of language in the mind. We don't have to identify with that being the same as us. So when we can kind of step back and get this separation where we're just allowing these senses to operate in proportion to each other, we can then feel like we can leave those up in our head and bring our awareness somewhere lower down in our body, where we're now feeling like, okay, we are aware as that sensation of pressure or movement in the trunk and in the arms and in the legs, while still allowing thought, vision, and hearing to be all operating independently. And so those senses are going to still be there. They're not going to go offline. But what we're essentially doing is we're relaxing them so that they're not primary. And what we're also doing is we're making sure that we're not referring back to thought and asking the mind for a second opinion every time we start to sense something. So instead of sensing something and then saying, oh, is that this? Is that this? We're just trying to experience the raw sensations themselves. And when we start to do this, this increases our level of acceptance, decreases our level of judgment, decreases our level of ego identification, takes us out of our head and puts us into our bodies. So if you can do that, if you can make that little shift from reaching, being very identified with vision and with the thoughts in your head, to feeling more of that receiving, first with hearing, allow the vision to still be there but not be focusing on any objects, then start to see the thoughts as just a little bit of language in the mind, as being different from who you are, as being different from the awareness that you are, and then leave all that there and become more embodied, sensing that movement and feeling in your body just purely. I think what you're going to find is all of a sudden when you go to do your exercises, you're going to get a hell of a lot more out of them. So I know we're rambling a little bit in this video today, but I promise you this is a super important skill. If you're someone who just can't seem to make any progress when it comes to movement, the mind piece of it might be what's holding you back. So learning how to separate from vision and from thought and to balance those senses out with the rest of your senses is going to be super important. So don't filter everything through a thought-based awareness. Try to balance those out through a more balanced awareness, and I think you're going to see your results skyrocket. If you need help go ahead and go to my website, book in on a call to see if you're a good fit for my movement coaching program. Sign up for the wait list where we'll be sending you the first notification of our new course that's going to be launching in July along with our group coaching program. So until next time, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Peace. And if you want to learn more about this, go ahead and watch this video here.